Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. All right. Good morning, movement masters of the universe. I am glad that you all have decided to come here. I know that it's kind of a stretch on Saturday morning at 8:30. Kind of got a rough slot, but we'll see what we can do about it. I'm going to start out with two short stories, two brief stories, one fictional, one non-fictional. When I first decided to do this presentation, I told my mom how excited I was because this is a concept, an idea, and some theories and some means and some methods that have kind of shaped the way that I've started to look at performance and physical preparedness. And I started to explain to her what it is that I was going to do and a paradigm that I was going to try and shift to a certain degree. And my mom said, "Shawn, I got the greatest story and analogy in the world for you. You have to tell it." And she has reminded me each and every day for about the past 2 weeks that I have to tell this story. So if this story is lame, which I kind of think it is, then you're going to go ahead and blame her. But she's like 5'9", 220, and 68 years old and can do 38 regular push-ups. So you're probably more scared about her than you are about me. So if you offend her, I'll let her know. So there once was a frog named Hopper, and Hopper lived deep, deep down in this well. And in the well, in the bottom of the well, he had lots of water in the puddle in the bottom, and he thought to himself, this is fantastic. I am happy down here and I'm content. But one day Hopper got super adventurous, and he climbed up the side of the well, and he got to the top, and he got some real estate, and he kind of hopped around as per his name, and he found himself a pond. And Hopper thought, whoa, what the hell have I been missing? Look at all this water in this swamp, in this extra area, and there's other animals out here, and so on and so forth. And Hopper thought to himself, okay, I'm going to explore this pond. He explores the pond, finds every little crook and cranny of the pond, and thinks to himself, well, another day, I'm going to try and see if I can find a bigger pond. So he hops a little further, goes over some more real estate, and lo and behold, he finds himself a lake. Lake is much bigger than the pond. Hopper's still pretty happy. Now, again, just like the pond, he kind of explores that lake and takes himself another step further. Hop, 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 you can kind of see where I'm going with this. And he takes himself to an ocean. Well, it is this time, of course, that I'm not a genius by any means, as you're gonna come to find out, but I am blessed with a certain degree of logical reasoning. And I say to my mom, aren't frogs freshwater and not saltwater, and isn't that frog gonna die if he gets to the saltwater? And she's like, Shawn, shut up. The people aren't gonna think about it that way. It's an analogy that's gonna hold true for some of the things that we're about to talk about. Okay. Now, I'm the same person at 4 years old who told my mom and dad that there was no way there could be a Santa Claus. So you can kind of see where I was going with that. So today we're going to talk about the movement, perfection, and optimization process. Let me give you a little caveat before we start and I get to my second story. Is the movement perfection process, I'm going to let you know right off the bat that perfection is an illusion. Movement perfection is an illusion, but I did it to get your asses in the seat. Okay? Because if I would have said this is the movement efficiency process or movement optimization process, you guys might still be at breakfast. But perfection is something that gives us a little bit more to shoot for. Okay? And that's something that I always aspired to with each and every one of my National Football League players on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, and year-to-year basis. My second story is non-fictional. The year was 2008, and I had started Explosive Edge, my business right across the road from the Minnesota Vikings Winter Park headquarters. And it had always been my dream, intention, and expectation to train National Football League players. That's the thing that I've always been passionate about. In that year, I finally got my first NFL player. We're talking about a guy named Ernie. Now, that's a fictional name, just simply so I don't call out my athlete for the embarrassment that is about to ensue. That athlete, Ernie, was already in the league for 2 years. He was a starting tight end in the league, and when Ernie got to me, I thought to myself, oh, this is great. I am about to take over the National Football League and about to show people what's up. And of course, I laid everything out like most good strength and conditioning professionals do. I laid out his testing. I looked into all of his data from all of that time prior to him getting to me. And with Ernie, I went through and tested him again, just like we all do as great strength and conditioning professionals. We go through our testing means and methods in order to get that best understanding of where his current motor abilities were. And lo and behold, what I found, like most people do find with guys who've been in the league for a number of years, is those combine numbers are no longer representative of who they are at that moment in time. So 2 years later, his vertical jump was down, his 40 was down, all those things. And I said, okay, that's fine. This is cool. I got that. I can take care of this. And of course, I designed that 12-week program in order to make sure that Ernie was going to come into training camp Bigger, better, freakier, and it was like Dr. Frankenstein and his little monster reincarnated. So, lo and behold, we go through the 12-week period of time, and sure enough, Shawn Myszka designed the greatest program of all time. He increased his vertical jump by 7.5 inches, his horizontal jump by 16, his 40 and his pro agility went down by 1/4 of a second, his squat went up by 60, his clean went up by 40, and I thought I was the greatest in the world. Side note, I still think that. But what I found out when I sent Ernie to training camp, I started to call him each and every day like I do with each one of my athletes right now. And I asked him, hey Ernie, what's up buddy? How you doing? How you feeling? How's it going? And he said, Shawn, it's okay. And I thought to myself, just okay, like is Ernie the most modest guy in the world? He's gotta be dominating out there. And so I think, okay, well I'm just gonna kind of take him and his grain of salt, or his word for his grain of salt, and I watched the first preseason game, and I'm knowing the NFL, you know, the starters only get 1 or 2 series in that first game. And I watched them, and Ernie didn't pop off the film to me. So I thought, okay, maybe, you know, it's NFL veterans, they don't really try that much in preseason. I'll wait till the season comes around. Well, of course, the first game of the season comes around, and he plays the entire game, and all I saw was Ernie playing and moving okay, just like he told me. And at that point, I scratched my head quite a bit. That's probably why I got this little bald spot on the top. But when I really started to investigate and look at it, I started to realize that I had come to a great crossroads in my career. I had done what I thought I was supposed to do. He increased his vertical, he decreased his 40 time, his pro agility got better. It wasn't like I didn't do any drills. But what I realized is that for some things to stick and show, I need to look much, much deeper. And you're gonna hear some of those stories and some of those concepts and ideas as we carry on. So in that crossroads, I had that great Robert Frost moment like we all have, where there's 2 paths, and I can either take the path that I've always been traveling and just continue to have a crapshoot of NFL players coming to me, and I can increase their 40 speed, increase their vertical, so on and so forth, or I can take the path commonly less traveled, that is. And that's what I did. Fortunately for me, and that has allowed me to still have Ernie to this day, if you're wondering, and he's now been to a couple Pro Bowls as well. And I'm gonna try to give you some ideas and some concepts and some things that I found as certainties along the way. What I realized is I had to go much, much deeper down the rabbit hole than I ever had before. And now granted, some of us have taken these steps, and I'm gonna say some things that are quite intuitively obvious to you all, but sometimes we forget in our program design because we get enamored with the idea of a faster 40 and a higher vertical jump and a bigger squat and so on and so forth. But if you start to chase that rabbit down the performance hole, you start to realize that every rabbit hole is different. And every rabbit has different capabilities and characteristics. And you're gonna chase that rabbit a long time. In the process of movement optimization, or the process of performance enhancement, is not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be as easy as saying, this person decreased their 40 times so they are a better football player. This person increased their squat so they are a better football player. Because some athletes may need that, and others, depending on the level of qualification, mastery, and preparedness, may need something much, much different. So even though this movement idea is not as sexy as squatting heavier or running a faster linear speed, the idea of movement gets them where they want to go, because I've come to realize 2 certainties the NFL players have showed me, and I think it applies to most individuals, no matter what the level of qualification and preparedness is number 1 on top, most athletes have one goal only, to attain greater performance when and where it counts. For me and my guys, that's on a field on Sunday afternoon. For some other athletes, a high school athlete, it might be a Friday night, a Thursday night, you're picking up what I'm putting down. And when I realized that and came to that realization, I started to look into some things from Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky, who had already studied quite a bit, but I started to look at some of his older works and realized that maybe he had some of these things already laid out for track and field athletes at least, and I wondered if there was ways that I can do it with my athletes as well, even though it's a different sport, it's a different domain, it's a different task. And I believe that you can, and I believe that I do. And what I found from Verkhoshansky from back in the 70s when he wrote these quotes is, as you can read there, but I'm going to say them because I believe that they're this important. I have them posted on my desk, in my house, everywhere. I probably have these 5, 6, 7, 8 places across my life. Is number 1, the essence of sport competition activity lies in the movements of the human body. And he went on to state furthermore that sport becomes a problem-solving activity in which movements are used to produce the necessary solutions. Think about that. Verkhoshansky wrote this in the 70s in the Fundamentals of Strength Training for Sport. And he went on to write it a few other times as things got updated. But I believe it's something that as strength and conditioning professionals in this room we often forget. That it's about the movements that's taking place in the sport demand and the efficiency that goes along with that. And sometimes strength is going to be a piece of it. Sometimes conditioning is. Sometimes the attainment of just general motor abilities is going to get us where we want to go. But as that athlete raises in level of mastery and qualification, the optimization of movement becomes that much more imperative. And that's the other thing I've come to find out. And if we're going to do that, we have to start thinking about things in a different way. We have to see things that we've seen before, but through a much different lens. You guys may have heard of the iceberg analogy. Is that 90% of the iceberg and its substance lies beneath the water. It lies where we cannot see it. We can speculate what lies beneath, but the substance and the strength that gives the iceberg what it is that makes it have staying and stabilization power is that which lies underneath the actual surface of the water. So this analogy, I believe, also holds true, and I promise that I will do more than just give analogies here over the next 40 minutes after this first 10. But the top 10% of this iceberg, I believe, is representative of some of those sexy numbers. The increase in the vertical jump, the increase in the squat, the decrease in the 40 times in the drill times. And what lies below it is really much more complex, don't get me wrong, but it's what makes the athlete in its movement and his movement on the field and in the environment what it is. So we must start to look below the surface and look at things in a different way. And I've come to a couple certainties from this idea and this paradigm shift in my own brain, and I want to try to implore you to think about it as well. The first thing is everything in life and movement. Furthermore, I should say that everything in life affects one's movement, and it affects one's movement everywhere. I know I heard a couple of people talk already. I know Mr. Lauren Landau, who's I think is probably the greatest mind, at least in my field, from a movement standpoint that I know. I've heard him say this before, and I've heard numerous others say it before, that when you're just sitting around watching people, once you start to understand movement, it becomes difficult to not judge people. And it's not you're judging them as who they are, but you're judging them for their movement. You should be judging me right now. And I hope on my evaluation sheet it's like, hey, did you see the way that he had his pelvis anterior tilted? No wonder he has such a strong heel strike and has these super dominant quads. Those are things you should be thinking to yourself all the damn time, because everything in life is movement, and movement is life, and everything affects it. So here's the caveat, ladies and gentlemen, is little things and big things all affect the movement that you see when they're walking around, or when they're on the field, or the court, or the track, or the rink, or the pitch. From the biggest of things down to the smallest of details, every little thing affects it. And the glory and the responsibility that goes along with that is great, because all of you are entrusted with affecting that athlete's movement on a day-to-day basis, even if you've only had your hands on him or her one time, or if you see them each and every day. And that's the cool thing. Okay? Because if that's true, the biggest of things down to the smallest of details, in life, everything in movement is affected by that which you behave, then we have to look at this process as the second certainty, that the behavior change of movement is what's going to get us where we want to go. We're not just trying to change strength characteristics, ladies and gentlemen. We're trying to change their behaviors. Because what happens is that behaviors and habits become patterns, and those patterns can be deemed efficient or inefficient, optimal or suboptimal. And that is something that we have to take into consideration with everything that we prescribe to the athlete or that which we instruct them to do. I often tell my athletes that when we're going through a session and they might have like a money rep, and I have this old cliche of, you guys may remember Randy Moss, and he once said in Minnesota, straight cash, homie, straight cash. So when I don't have anything to say to the athlete because he just banged that rep out and that set out, I just say straight cash. But I often tell them the caveat that goes along with this is that the judge of who I am as a coach isn't determined by how they perform when they're with me. It's determined not only how they perform on Sundays, but how they do it the other 7 days of the week. Because I might have that athlete, at least at this time of the year, for 14 hours a week. Well, there's 168 hours in a week. That means 154 hours for them to go F it up. Okay? So if I didn't do the right things to lay them on the right path, it's not going to be a good result. And so we try to take control or consideration of this because, as Aristotle once said, as you can see, that old cliche quote is, we are what we repeatedly do. So let's make sure our habits are where they need to be, because mastery of one's behaviors lead to the mastery of one's movement. Because when push comes to shove and chaos ensues, like the whitewater rafter, we're going to resort to that which we know best, not to that which we know is best. Does that make sense? Let me repeat it for you. When chaos ensues in sport, the athlete is going to resort to that which he knows best, not to that which we've told him is best or what he thinks is best or what he feels is best, to that which he knows best. We have a great influence of that, but it's something for us to continually think about. So when I start to screen, most people, when they hear that I'm a movement guy, I'm a movement first guy, I'm a movement specialist, they're like, oh, well, what movement screen do you use? I'll tell you what movement screen I use, and it's right there up in front of you. I watch my NFL players meticulously, probably more than any other coach, even those employed by the team. I guarantee you, I am watching from the time that that game ends, even though I just watched it, and I'm watching play by play by play, frame by frame by frame, in determining what is happening. Because that is what is telling me the true litmus test as to who that athlete is, where it is that I need to go, as well as how effective our means and methods have been up to this point. But most of us have gotten so accustomed to assessing movement in a non-organic state, in a non-organic environment, that we don't know what the hell we're looking at when we watch sport. I'll tell you one thing, my NFL players, I have to, at the end of the game, I have to go look at the box score because I don't know what the heck the score is. The only thing I know is, did my player score, yes or no? Did my player win or lose based on his movement, yes or no? Those are the things that I'm judging and assessing at all times. But we've gotten away from that, and we don't know how to understand that which is occurring in all the things that are influencing it. I'm going to try to enlighten you briefly as much as I possibly can today as to different things that I look at and think of, and how that affects my program design in what I would refer to as the movement optimization process, or, like I said in the title slide, the movement perfection process. Okay? Because this is what is telling us if that athlete is efficient versus inefficient. I may see knee valgus on a simple vertical jump, but if I don't see it on the field, I don't believe it's dysfunctional enough for me to change. Because the movement is what's telling me. The movement, when and where it counts, is the ultimate screen. That's the behaviors I need to assess. Now we know that a lot of different things are influencing that behavior. Okay? This is just a very, very tip of the iceberg. Okay? That pun was intended. We're seeing different things and things that people typically look at. We know these concepts and these principles, but when we watch someone move, we often don't think about it this way. We often think about it in terms of biomechanics, and that's it. We don't think about the connection and the integration of all of these factors over on the left-hand side that are then potentially leading to the compensations and the dysfunctional patterns that we may see showing themselves on the field on Sunday, those same behaviors that I need to influence and change. And if I don't, I'm going to get my ass fired. And rightfully so. Ernie probably should have fired me, but Ernie's still with me in this, and luckily I've changed my methods and he's seen 2 Pro Bowls. So he got to see Honolulu twice. I wasn't able to go either time. Okay? But we have to start looking at things for what they are. But again, remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Those things that are influencing the human movement system and how it behaves in sport is vast, it's complex, and sometimes it's not easy to figure out. We sometimes have to put ourselves out there on a pedestal to be able to figure out what it is that's occurring, and sometimes we're going to be wrong, sometimes we're going to be right. Some things are testable, some things are not. And we have to start to understand these concepts. We all think in biomechanics, we all think in anatomy, we all think in kinesiology. But very few of us necessarily apply it on a day-to-day basis when we're trying to assess our athletes. And this is something that I'm imploring you to do. So when I'm watching the movement take place on the field, I'm looking at what I would refer to as the biodynamic structure of that sport movement task. The biodynamic structure being essentially how the athlete's inner working mechanisms interact with what the environment, that constantly changing environment, is giving that athlete. Because if I can influence this biodynamic structure through these characteristics, I know that I will change their world. For an NFL player, which is what I do, this is the majority of stuff that I do. Most of them have plenty of general motor abilities. Their motor potential is through the roof. They just don't use it. And by having small tweaks and adjustments to each one of these characteristics in the movement patterns, as long as I can change the behavior, I can change their performance. And people will talk to me about the 10,000-hour rule, blah, blah, blah. But I see it each and every day with my Ferraris of athletes, but I believe that it also has a trickle-down effect because that NFL player has solidified a greater technical execution, a much more solidified technical execution than the lower-level athlete. Now, we might have to do different things in the path in order to attain that movement mastery, but these are all things that we have to look at. Posture, balance, base of support, center of gravity. Now, we all know how to look for it, but what about changing it? What's a slight change to the base of support or the center of gravity in a movement pattern going to do? It could mean everything. It could mean those milliseconds that either him with a house call or him with a 3-yard loss. Shawn getting paid or not paid, and Shawn likes to get paid. Okay? So we look at some of those things: stability, mobility, direction of force, absorption versus exertion, and the stiffness and the role of neuromuscular apparatus as well. So this leads me to some things that we often think about, but we often don't necessarily address. That biodynamic structure and the display of the inner workings of that athlete in his response to the environment includes that bottom portion that I feel most people often miss when they're assessing movement, screening movement in a non-organic way. So what I mean by that is when they're not doing it in the sport and assessing it in the sport movement actions and tasks at hand. We all can figure out kinetics, okay? The effects of forces on the body, the kinematics. What muscle at what time, at what intensity controls what action? And is it the right muscle at the right time, at the right intensity to control a given action, in sequence with other muscle groups? But finally, the most important point that I want you to acknowledge and be aware of is what I would refer to, and Verkhoshansky would refer to, as the kinesiological patterning. It's essentially what's going to happen when chaos ensues. The biomechanics and the kinetics and the kinematics will be changed drastically when kinesiological patterning is involved. The idea and the movement mastery that's involved with it, essentially psychology integrated with physiology. It's the cognitive perceptual ability to take in the environment, the constantly changing conditions, and adjust your movement behaviors because of it. And this is something vital for us to look at, understand, and look for ways to drill. But there's a step-by-step process, and I'm going to get to that in a few slides. Okay? So once I read chapter 2 of Super Training over and over and over again by Stephen Verkhoshansky. If you haven't seen it, it obviously is very theoretical, conceptual, but it has allowed me to kind of branch off and do the things that I am showing you right now. And this is the way that I kind of displayed and think about it. Anytime that I'm assessing my athlete's movement and their displayed characteristics, it all starts there. But I know that each one of these boxes around is influencing it. They're deterministic factors. And they have a host of other things that go along with it, but they all influence. And notice the red lines and the red dotted lines. I don't know if you can tell that those are supposed to be dashed. Okay? They all influence each other as well. So small changes to one box in some of the deterministic factors that go along with that box will not only influence the displayed characteristics, but it will influence the other boxes. So again, kinesiological patterning will affect kinematics. Kinematics will affect kinetics, so on and so forth. We all know this, but we have to remind ourselves of it every time we watch movement. So I think about kinetics in terms of the working effect. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, force-time or force-velocity relationships that are taking place in the context of the movement, ladies and gentlemen. This is all in the context of the movement. The working effect for a cutting action should not be assessed, in my opinion, with a 1-rep max squat and checking the working effect there. It's the context of the movement at hand. Again, some of these are quantitative, such as with a force plate. Some of them are qualitative, such as our eyes in the art of seeing it. Okay? So we start to look at how the influence is here between each one of these. Kinematics being influenced by biomechanical efficiency, the leverage points that we place our body in, how we change our base of support, our center of gravity is going to change joint position. It's also going to change influences from muscle tendinous complex. And then when we look at the neuromuscular efficiency, being affecting also the kinematics, but that is the intra and intramuscular coordination. and the reflexes that go along with that. So stress shortening cycle influence. And then finally, I try not to have any bias, but I believe that this box on the bottom is the one that I've been able to influence the most with my high level of mastery of athletes, is the movement mastery level. So how solidified is that movement? How comfortable are they in their environment, in the constantly ever-changing conditions of their environment? Because that movement mastery level, whether they're a low level of qualification, moderate, high, etc., is going to determine what steps I need to take and how it is that they're processing information. So it's anticipation, it's sensory, it's kinesthetic sense and behaviors, all of those types of things. So from there, that led me to take some of Verkhoshansky's stuff and morph it and mold it into a process. And this is just the overview of my process, okay, but I think it depicts that which I'm trying to do at all times. I want to make a note here, S, which I didn't lay out what it is, but it is important because it is when we come into sport form. When all these 3 points intersect with one another, we want to be in the highest sport form humanly possible. P being motor potential. I'm talking work capacity, strength characteristics, motor potential that is moving from left to right and from general to more specific. Most of my NFL players, when they first get to me, have varying levels of specific motor potential. They all have tremendous general work capacity, well, unless they're kind of lazy. But they all have tremendous general motor potential, the general strength characteristics, but they might not be putting them into use. The technical mastery, or the technical execution, moving from left to right, from one of more variable on the left to one of more solidified nature on the right, so one of less mastery, less competence, to one of more mastery and more competence over on the right. And those are things that I'm always trying to bridge those two together, in that motor potential being utilized in the technical execution. And notice how I do that through. I do it through that bottom curve, which is R, or the training intensity stimuli, which then will move from GPP to SPP to SDE. So I don't want to see anything on the evaluations about saying that this guy wants us to specialize right from the start. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying at low levels of mastery, we can have GPP. I wish it actually had that on there, the GPP to SPP to SDE. For those of you who don't know those terms, GPP, general physical preparedness, SPP, special physical preparedness, and SDE, or depending on what frames of reference you have, SST. So the specialized developmental exercise and activity, or special strength training, which is specifically towards sport. And by merging these together, we can more fully come into what we would refer to as sport form. Okay? Sport form at the right place and at the right time, which is on the field on Sunday when it comes around. So at all times, I'm trying to integrate the athlete's respective motor potential, so the utilization of that which he already possesses, as well as the optimization of that which we know is going to carry over into the movement tasks at hand. I'm trying to marry those two things together. Specific motor potential and technical mastery and execution. I'm trying to bridge them together. And oftentimes our means and our methods are very different to do both. But when the athlete achieves a high enough level of mastery and gets closer and closer to sport form, that is my only objective. Okay? We're trying to enhance the specific strength quality exactly how it's going to be used. So when I start to analyze that, the things that we already talked about, okay, when we analyze the technical movement patterns at hand, one thing that I should mention about the little graph where I bridge motor potential, technical mastery, and then the training stimuli, is that can be either global, meaning the athlete and who his specialized morphofunctional structure is for the sport demands, or it can be very local down to one movement pattern for that athlete. Does that make sense? So it can either be the athlete and who he is as a representation of that in the sport, or it can be one movement pattern: acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, throwing, kicking, jumping. Okay? And even just the respective execution of that movement pattern, a crossover versus a power cut, a lunge cut, etc. Okay? And at all times, I'm trying to look at these displayed characteristics and figure out ways to influence them. Again, these are very tip of the iceberg. So I ask myself very detailed questions when I watch the movement. I'm not going to go over each one of these, but each one of these will address, at some way, shape, or form, the influence and integration of kinetics, kinematics, and kinesiological patterning, as you can see. If you don't have these slides or you want them, make sure that you email me, and I will definitely get them to you. Because this is the line of questions that when I'm watching sport movement happen on Sundays, I'm asking myself. And it seems like a very tedious and meticulous process, correct? You're damn right it is. That's why I watch film during the season for about 18 to 20 hours on Sunday to Monday. Because I know that when that athlete sees me on Tuesday, even though I have Winter Park right across the road, they're still going to come to me in order to try to optimize this movement because they know that that time is the most important time of the year, and I can make tweaks and adjustments based on these characteristics in their display. Okay? So these are things that I'm asking myself, the detailed questions, is where that lies. And at all times as I investigate and try to get answers, either I'm speculating qualitatively when I watch it on field, or if I have the ability to use a force plate or 3D imaging or what have you in my facility, then at that point I can try to determine cause and effect. But that is something that we need to do. We can't just throw a dart at a dartboard like I showed on the first slide and hope that something sticks. We have to try to figure out if it's a motor pattern, a strength characteristic, or a pain and injury influenced thing. And at all times, in regards to the specific movement patterns that are important for that athlete, I have to ask myself, what would make it more optimal? And if you train lower levels of mastery of athletes, then by all means, the thing that would make it more optimal is strength characteristics. But if I chase a greater squat with the majority of my NFL players, you're not going to see it in their change of direction on the field, because there's a much more intricate process that has to be involved with that, and I'm trying to enlighten you on that as we go over these next number of slides. So what would make it more optimal? You have to put yourself out there on a pedestal, but I believe that it can come from these three main ways, as long as we can answer those detailed questions that came in the slide before. But here's the rub, is that when we watch sport movement, what I've come to find out and what I believe to be true is there isn't any blanket technical execution for a respective motor skill and motor act that can be deemed optimal for all. Now, based on the theory of functional systems and dynamic systems, we know that there's certain attractors and fluctuations that are going to occur in that technical execution. There's certainties that we can make, generalizations, but we can't make that across the whole movement task, unfortunately. Because what we find is that every individual is different. If I want to be faster in the 100-meter dash, and I would love to be, of course, I would probably look at Usain Bolt and say, ha, I'm going to be Usain Bolt, and I'm going to watch everything that he does in his technical execution. I'm also going to follow his same process towards sustaining the same level of mastery, and if we do the same things, we're going to get where we want to go. Unfortunately, that's not true. Obviously, I'm 5'6" on 190 pounds. Usain is 6'5" on 190 pounds. We look slightly different. We have different tendon attachments, maybe just a little, if you see me in shorts later, okay? So what we find is that those peculiarities and anthropometric features will make a great difference to the execution of the technical display that we're seeing. It's also what's determining optimal. And so when we assess optimal, we can use our experience, we can use that which we've seen happen for athletes before, but we have to be able to understand that every athlete is different, and every athlete, like the 7 billion people on this earth, has their own movement fingerprint for each and every movement, action, and task and activity that they participate in. And that's where the art comes into play, okay? We can take a step-by-step process to try and make some of those attractors work, okay? Some of those things that we know are certainties. But to move us from a level of variable to solidified, we have to allow that athlete be who he is, or who he or she is, and try to make that fingerprint as clean and crisp as possible. But what we find as we continue to attain levels of mastery that are higher and higher and higher, is it can be confusing, because technique is never constant. If it were constant, Usain Bolt would run a 9.58 every damn day. But it's not, he only did it once, okay? Just like I know that one of my athletes may display a very crisp, proficient power cut one day, and the very next day, I'm thinking to myself, did I do any work yesterday whatsoever? So we have to realize and understand the role of supercompensation and adaptation, and the variability that ensues, because if those four factors, kinetics, kinematics, and kinesiological patterning are different, notice there's different things in there, in those boxes, in those factors. One main thing that hits on each one of those points is the neuromuscular system, and when the neuromuscular system is involved, we know the brain is involved. So if that athlete had a terrible day the day before, it's likely that his technique is going to be a little off the next day, or the same day, or what have you. So, and we have to remember that we're influencing the specific motor potential, and if we're influencing the specific motor potential, we already know that those two things are tied together with technical execution. So be aware of that and understand that as you start to try and help your athletes master the art of optimizing their movement. And when I start to look at the biodynamic structure, we figured out, or we talked briefly about the what, we talked about the why, and now, glory be to God, you're going to finally hear some of the how. Okay? We're going to determine how it is that we're going to go about improving it. Again, some of this is putting yourself out on a pedestal, but the bottom point that I think is something for us to continue to hit on is that training process at all times should be viewed as one where we're going to constantly attempt to use all of the athlete's specific work capacity and specific motor potential in the execution of the movement patterns and tasks and characteristics at hand. That, in my opinion, is one of the essence of technical movement mastery. And when we do that, of course, a lot of you guys are thinking to yourselves, well, that's fine. I'm just going to continue to do my squat, I'm going to do my deadlift, and I'm going to do my clean, and I'm going to make them run this linear pre-programmed drill, and then I'm going to just include some drills, excuse me, that appear to be sport specific. And I ask you the question right now that I believe has an arbitrary answer. It depends on the athlete and it depends on the situation, as probably does everything that we've already talked about. Is that which one came first? The drill or the athlete actually executing the drill? Do you think my boy AD here, do you think he did a lot of this agility drill to get to be who he was before he got to Oklahoma and then went on to storm upon the National Football League? Some cases maybe, right? Because that's what I'm proposing that we should do as long as the stimulus and the process is correct, as we're about to talk about on the following slide. But we have to realize that there's certain things that we shouldn't attempt to tweak and adjust. You see this movement from the little puppy here doing the agility drill. Okay? That seems like a slalom drill that many of us might do. We may just have those poles put in different places or at different angles, which I do. I'll include stimuli at times. But Adrian there, I want you guys to think about this. That was his very first game back from a torn ACL and MCL. Very first game. He hadn't practiced at all prior to that point. Okay? Think about that. He didn't get hit. He barely got butt up against. All he did was get himself through his rehab process. Okay? And he's out there juking people and goes on to an MVP season. Okay? Sometimes the brain and the kinesiological patterning, we don't want to confuse that process. And it's something for us to think about when we look at the proper process that's going to take place to get movement skill perfection. I remind you, for those of you who came in a little late, is perfection is an illusion, optimization is where we're after. Okay? I've used this step-by-step process since I've seen Tom Myslinski write about it back in a dissertation, I believe, for Elite back in like 2003. And we take this step-by-step process to think about the attainment of greater motor skill or movement skill acquisition for an athlete of any level. But we must start at 1 and end at 7. Instead of what most people do is start at 7 and hope that we got to get to 1 somewhere along the way. Okay? Step by step, 1 through 7. A couple different points here that I want you to think about. Note on the very top point is repetition applies in every piece of that, or every step of that way. Every piece of that puzzle. So as you can see, if you're looking at it closely, and again, if you don't have these slides, I'll send them to you because I believe that this slide is a key one. It's a process that I take with every one of my athletes, and now the time that you're going to spend at each step is not hard set. It's not a bunch of sets and reps that I can give you up here and I can stand up here and tell you. But I can tell you this, is that if you break down a specific movement pattern based on some of the characteristics and the qualities and the questions that I had you ask before, when you're watching an athlete and you get specific with your aims in regards to some of the deficiencies, compensations, and dysfunctions that we see occurring, if you attempt to address them in this step-by-step process, I've seen it work for athletes of all levels. Okay? And what a couple different things happens here is a deliberate nature, repetition of it, so we allow that athlete continue to go to his brink. Look at that each step along the way as well. He's continuing to go to the brink every single time. The brink of learning, okay? Because that's how we're going to ensure that certain movement patterns and movement skill acquisition sticks. In number 7, we only introduce sport-specific strategies when it is that we know that the athlete will be effective and efficient enough to use it, okay? So unfortunately, it's less sexy. But as Mr. Miyagi taught us in Karate Kid, is that step-by-step process can work for teaching pretty much any movement skill. You guys have seen the movie. Probably, hopefully, and if you haven't, we're going to have a viewing party out in the lobby afterwards. Okay? Mr. Miyagi comes home after a long, fruitful day of fishing. Daniel's son has been slaving for 10, 12, 14 hours. It's dark. And Daniel's son says to Mr. Miyagi, hey, yo, what the hell, old man? You're supposed to be teaching me karate. All I'm doing is being your damn slave, and I'm doing all these chores. Mr. Miyagi says, oh no, young grasshopper, you got this wrong because you are learning karate. And of course, we see as a step-by-step process ensues a theatrical overview of that which I'm proposing on the previous slide and everything before it and everything I'll ever say after it, at least that which I come to know right now, is wax on, wax off, sand the floor, paint the fence, will get us certain places that we want to go to be able to make sure that when the Cobra Kai comes to kick our ass, we can, wax on, wax off, and then give them a crane kick, okay? Because Miyagi knows best, expertise in mastery development has to be that step-by-step process towards movement skill acquisition. Learning can come in all forms, and you see that with the chores, okay? I'm not telling you to go tell your athletes to go wax your car, okay? I know what my athletes would say if I told them that. But learning can come in all forms as long as we make sure that we're influencing the habits, which influence the patterns, which influence those behaviors that are going to be found to be deemed inefficient versus efficient, optimal versus suboptimal. Second, cues are king, as Nick Winkelman told us on Thursday. Internal versus external cues. What did Mr. Miyagi say in his cues? Wax on, wax off. Sand the floor, paint the fence. He didn't say internally and externally rotate your shoulder, because he knew that was going to be too much information for his young little protege to be able to comprehend. So he wanted to give him big circles. And the third point there is he said, when he said, hey, Daniel's son, show me wax on, wax off. And Daniel's son, like a sarcastic little ass, says, wax on, wax off. And Mr. Miyagi says, no. That is not right. Deliberate. Wax on, boom. Wax off, boom. And everything is locked right into play. And then the repetitive nature that goes along with that, deliberate intent. But yet Mr. Miyagi knew that wasn't going to be enough because Johnny is tougher than Daniel's son and much bigger. So he knew when push came to shove, chaos was going to ensue and Daniel's son was going to resort to that which he knew best. But he had to get it to stick. So he introduced variability as Daniel's son started to display proficiency. But only when he displayed proficiency, and then he continued to add different patterns. Look at that. That's exactly what it is that I was telling you to do based on Tom Lisinski's slide of motor skill acquisition right prior to this. And the fifth thing is always keep eye. I promised one of my athletes, because they got me this damn Mr. Miyagi thing right here. I was going to wear it. I told him I would wear it, but I kind of pansied out. But, so I showed it to you instead, okay? Because they got it for me because we have what we refer to as Movement Mastery Mondays, where we try to do the same step and step-by-step process towards movement patterns that they don't know. And always keep eye is something that I say to my athletes, just simply because I want to slap them across the head once in a while. And so when they put their head down, you put your head down on a field on Sunday, and you can get laid out, okay? Just like Daniel's son would if he put his head down when he was fighting Johnny. Always keep eye. The eye will keep your sensory system on a heightened state of awareness, but what do we do in our drills? Oh, here's this cone. I want you to go to this drill, or I want you to go to this cone and then execute the drill by going in this direction. Look at the cone, because it's right there. We got a cut on it, and we wonder why it doesn't stick on the field on Sundays. Make your sensory system get in a heightened state of awareness, and you'll start to use it, okay? And as the athlete does this, they will learn to drive again, and they're going to feel awkward along the way. I promise you that. I always tell my athletes this little analogy and this little story. As you can see, I like analogies, and I also like sweet cars, okay? Is I ask them, if you were going to get in your car, you can have any car. My guys just happen to have the Escalade, so I talk about the Escalade a lot. There's a lot of Escalades that fill explosive edges parking lots, so it works. But whatever car your athlete drives, or whatever car you drive, it can fit as the Escalade. If you were to get in your car and just hop in it, and go home from work, which car would you select to get you there the fastest? Day one. Most people, and my NFL players don't get this until I tell them, is they all answer inevitably, I want that damn Ferrari. Now some of them have Ferraris, so that doesn't work nearly as well, okay? But they said, I want that Ferrari, as most of you probably would answer right away as well. But you'd be wrong. Because unless you've driven a Ferrari before or owned a Ferrari before, you're going to walk out there and be like, I am such a baller. I got a Ferrari. Look at this thing. It's shiny. It's new. It's clean. It's crispy. But yeah, you get in it, and you don't know where the shifter is. You don't even know how to shift it. The clutch works a lot differently than probably the clutch in your car. Maybe you don't even know how to drive a stick. You don't know where to shift it, how to shift it, where the radio tunes, anything. And by the time that you get in the car and actually get it out of first gear, it's likely that you would have been home in the Escalade, the Yugo, the Pinto, whatever it is that you own, okay? And as you do that, you have to learn to feel. And that's what I tell my athletes, is every single day it's a feeling process, because as the Ferrari gets more clean, and as you get more accustomed to driving it, every single day, by day 14, you'd much rather have that Ferrari than that Escalade. Even though Escalade's a sweet car, okay? But you'd still much rather have the Ferrari to drive. Once you feel, and the feeling is everything, your athletes have to learn through kinesthetic sense and awareness, balance, and acquisition, so they can be aware of their surroundings. And that's what our drills must do if you go back to a number of slides. At all times along the way, I'm kind of wrapping up here, but we know that when quantity and quality hit, quantity is going to trump quality. But we have to make sure that the quality that we've attained throughout that quantity is of the most optimal nature. So in our training, to get motor learning and acquisition to happen, we push that athlete to the brink of their edge, okay? My dad watches Price is Right religiously, so I've had to see this damn show so many times. And they got this yodeling dude, and he's yodeling as he climbs up, and the people are freaking out. The contestants like, oh shit, I'm in chaos, I gotta hit now. And then he's either underbid, overbid, you get the drill, okay? Our athletes in the process of attaining their movement mastery is kind of the same way. Push them to the edge. Hopefully you don't look as confused as the dude over on the left, okay? But at all times, we know that it's going to hit. Because here's the thing, as I wrap up, is true movement mastery in individual movement patterns and actions in sport equate to ownership. If I don't give that athlete ownership or allow him to find a way in a process of attaining that ownership, then it's like me driving the Ferrari and them sitting in the passenger seat. I don't want to have them ride shotgun. I got to give them the keys to the Ferrari and let them learn how to drive it correctly. And the athlete needs to be self-sufficient to the ever-changing conditions. I saw this virtuosity coined phrase. I don't know where it even came from, so if somebody in the room who actually termed it or gave me the definition, I apologize, but I have it on my desk. Virtuosity, movement virtuosity, has been able to adjust to do the most optimal things in all conditions. So the ever-changing conditions do the right thing at the right time for the athlete. And in order to do that, we must establish movement quality standards on a day-to-day basis. We don't want to allow bad movement to occur, but we know that sometimes it will, and we just have to be able to make the right cues and adjustments. We must realize that practice isn't going to make perfect, but it will make more permanent. Knowing that technique is also variable, we know that it's not going to be firm and set permanent, but we only want to hit the save button at the right time. And then finally, the goal of any type of movement session for efficiency, optimization, and perfection is not to perform identical each and every time, but to allow that athlete to achieve mastery and have the keys to the car. I have these other slides on there. I implore you to check them out. The presentation was originally made to be a little longer, but I just wanted to show you some of the things and the ideas there. Not saying that we're going to specialize every single athlete based on the movement, tasks, and activities of his sport, but what I am saying, we have to match level of preparedness with their level of qualification and their level of mastery at all times. So hit me up if you need that. Here's my calls to action to you as I wrap. Fully understand your sport movement and the behavior of it. Know that every sport movement is different. Understand your individual in that movement. So go out and watch your athletes on field, on court, on track, on rink, on pitch. And then from there, assess what it is that they're doing, when and where it counts. And then, and only then, once you understand the what, you can then understand or attempt to understand the why and try to take steps towards determining the how. And at all times uphold a movement quality standard that is above and beyond your peers, respective of the athlete, or irrespective, of the athlete and the level of athlete that you train, and you'll get where you want to go. If you like the information that I have here, I did actually start a new brand that is focused on this. It's called Movement Mastery, and it's at optimizedmovement.com. I give out free content each and every Tuesday. And then I also have a paid subscription site, but I'm not up here to sell you anything. I hope that I was able to enlighten you on some of these ideas and be able to take you to that next step of achieving the art of optimizing movement. Thank you.